everyone. Marc Sabatella. I'd like to welcome you all to this week's episode of the MuseScore Café. So this episode, as always, is brought to you by the Mastering MuseScore School. Encourage you to go check it out. I've posted the link at the top, so if you haven't already, go check it out. Sign up for my newsletter if you haven't, and check out the online courses that I have, such as the Mastering MuseScore Complete Online course for learning MuseScore, as well as my theory courses like the Basic Theory, the Harmony course, my Counterpoint course that I'm working on, and all the other options that I provide there. So that's the end of the commercial. Today's episode, I want to talk about navigation, which is really kind of a basic topic, and yet I find over and over again people who have been using MuseScore a long time often don't figure out some of the options that exist for navigating their scores and end up doing things perhaps less efficiently than they otherwise would be if they knew a few more things. So I'm here to show you. And of course, if you're just getting started with MuseScore, you're going to find this, I think, really, really useful, everything that I talk about. All right, so welcome everyone, and I appreciate all the check-ins that I'm seeing in the chat. And thanks. And let's see. All right, so one of the things that I've done here, if I did this right, I turned on my demo mode so that you can see my my keystrokes. Very first thing I want to show you. So when I talk about navigation, I mean right now we're looking at the last two measures of the score here, right? I don't want to look at the last two measures. I want to go back to the beginning. How would I do that? For some reason, it seems like a lot of people figure out that if you click a blank area of the score and drag it, you can kind of move around, but that's going to take me a long time to do that, to click, drag, and move one screen full at a time. It take me a long time to get back to the beginning, and in the process, I might accidentally, click, and what did I just do? I'm dragging a note and creating all this extra space I didn't mean to create, right? That click-drag method is, I won't say it's completely useless, but I will say, generally speaking, that's not what you want to do. So let me click drag back to the end here and show you that the home key on your keyboard, if your keyboard has a home key, takes you home. So when I press home, it positions the score back at the beginning. Now, I don't have a physical home key, and I am just bringing up the chat on my phone to make sure I can follow it without having to continually switch windows. So just give me one moment. Okay, so the home key is a great key, but I don't have a physical home key. A lot of laptops don't have physical home keys, and I guess on Mac OS, even the desktop keyboards typically don't have home keys, although I could be mistaken. But and if you don't have a physical home key, that's fine. Usually there's like a key FN, or might be labeled with some fancy symbol. On my Chromebook, it's a circle with a dot in the middle. That plus left arrow is my home. That plus right arrow is end. So it's a quick way to get to the beginning or the end of a score. So hugely valuable. So if you don't already know about home and end, use them. FN left, FN right, if you don't have physical home and end keys. There is, while I'm on that subject, a subtle difference, and it's actually changed from release to release a little bit, between home and control home. So let me show what the difference is. I'm going to jump back to the end of the score with end, and I'm going to select something. I'm going to select the B flat here. Oh, I thought I reset my volume, but I guess I didn't. There we go. B flat. So I've got that B flat selected. Now I'm going to hit home. I'm back at the beginning of the score. What do you think's going to happen now if I say, I don't know, press V to make whatever selected invisible? What do you think is selected right now? I'm going to press V, and you see when I pressed V, it jumped back to the end of the score, and it made that note invisible. Home repositions the view to the beginning, but it doesn't change anything about what's selected. So home repositions the view but doesn't change the selection. Whereas control, and same with end. If I select something at the beginning here, say this rest, and I'll go end, it positions me at the end, but it doesn't select anything in particular. Control home goes to the beginning and selects the very first thing in the score, which is typically the bar line there. Control end goes to the end and selects the last thing, which is generally the final bar line of the last staff. So the reason this matters is, what if you want to select an entire staff? Well, let me go back to the beginning and say I want to select everything after the pickup here. I want to select from the first measure of the trombone part to the end. I want to press at this point Shift, because Shift plus any navigation selects. And that's everything I've said so far is true for pretty much every program. Home and end, this isn't a MuseScore thing. They didn't put those keys on a keyboard just for MuseScore, right? Those are just a thing. Shift plus any keyboard, like Shift plus right arrow, will extend the selection kind of one note or rest at a time, right? If you want to select all the way to the end, it'll be Shift, then Control, End. Since Control End selects the last element, Shift Control End extends the selection all the way to that last element. So yes, so that's how you select large portions of the score. Shift plus any of these navigation commands. So again, what happens if I do just Shift End? What's going to happen? So the answer is I don't know, because I think that's one of the things that's changed. So I'm zooming out, and zooming isn't navigation, but it seems relevant to talk about. I am using Control and two-finger swipe. That is the gesture that does zoom on at least MuseScore and most other programs. Two-finger swipe is scroll wheel. I don't have a physical mouse with a physical scroll wheel. I have a touchpad, but two-finger swipe is how most laptops emulate the mouse scroll wheel. So two-finger swipe is scrolling up and down. This I mentioned in the newsletter. And then if I do that with Shift, it scrolls sideways. Some keyboards or some touchpads let you actually two-finger swipe sideways. This one does, but not all do. And I have to say it's a little erratic on this particular touchpad. Mac touchpads often let you just sort of do this really smoothly. You can see it's kind of jumping for me. I'm moving in circles like this. And on my keyboard, that's just really, it's moving in a square more so than a circle. But on a Mac, you can actually scroll around very smoothly like that. Okay, so what I was leading towards here, so now I want to control zoom to zoom a little bit more. What I want to do here is I want to see what happens if I just do Shift End as opposed to Shift Control End. I'll tell you what I think maybe is going to happen. I think it's going to select to the end of the page. Yep, that's what it did. End just goes to the end of the page when you're doing that. That's another common thing in a lot of applications. End moves to the end of the page, Control End to the end of the whole document. In MuseScore, for whatever reason, we made End go all the way to the end of the score, Home go all the way to the beginning. I think that's a relatively recent change, and I think, but I'm not sure, I'm going to find out in a second, I think that also affects playback. So let's find that out. If I press spacebar right now, I just selected a measure on the second page. And now I'm in, if I press spacebar, it continues where I left off. I think if I press home, it repositions the view, but I think it may have also rewound the playback. Nope, it didn't. So scratch that. I know it's been requested, it's been considered, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work that way. It's just a way to look at the beginning of the score without losing your selection, which is itself an occasionally useful thing. All right, so so far I've showed home and end, control home, control end, and I've shown swiping. These are huge, right? are way better than dragging the score to go any sort of long distance, because that, just to maybe slightly center the page a little better. Okay, dragging an empty spot in the score works okay for that. What if what you really want to do is just kind of move through the score page by page? Well, here again, if you've got a physical home and end key, you probably have physical page up and page down keys. I don't, but FN plus up and FN plus down. So FN left is home, FN right is end, but FN up is page up. So it moves literally a page at a time. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. I am page downing here. This is FN down. It's moving me a page at a time. Now, I'm going to view one of the, well, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit further so the whole page doesn't fit at once. If I do this, and then I hit page down, what it actually does is it sort of scrolls. I'm still on the first page, you can tell, because there's my copyright message, and because you see the time and key signature here. Page up and page down won't skip to the next page if you can't see the whole page. It sort of scrolls the page first, then goes to the next page, and then scrolls it. Top of the next page, scrolls it. That's page up, page down by itself. Control, let me get back to the beginning with page up. Control page down moves directly to the next page. Control page down is there's page 3, there's page 4, and so on. That is, I think, a relatively new thing also. Maybe around 3.4 or 3.5 that was changed. So a lot of this navigation stuff actually does, it gets tweaked, it gets refined based on user feedback, based on comparison to other programs and how they work, and trying to make things more consistent, more intuitive, make them work more the way people expect, but also taking into account that music is different than other things. And so, there can be reasons why things should be a little different, but trying to make them as natural as possible. Okay, so page up, page down. Yeah, so page up, page down, kind of scroll the page, then move to the next one. So it's actually very useful for doing that. Now, as I'm doing this, let me zoom out for a second. You can see that these pages, now I'm doing my 2-finger swipe. You can see the pages are kind of laid out horizontally here, right? One after another. This is because, well, there's a setting for that, and I need to do something right now that I don't know. Let me just do something really quick, and then I'll tell you what I did. Okay, good. There is a setting that controls whether those pages display horizontally like this, or if they are vertical. That setting is by default to horizontal, because if you were working with a score like this for many instruments, it's really nice. Then they just sort of scroll, and the alto part in one page kind of leads naturally to the alto part on the next page. But if you're writing, say, piano music or a lead sheet, there's a number of other things where you probably want things arranged more vertically. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, Canvas, you will see here a few settings that are actually relevant, but this is the one here, scroll pages vertically. And if I do that, now my pages are vertically arranged. Not an improvement for this score at all, but for other scores it might be. So the question is, why isn't that a per score setting? That's a good question, because we didn't think of it. It wasn't thought of when that setting was invented. Probably it should be. However, that said, we have recourse. This arrangement, this vertical arrangement, I actually like quite a lot, because then I only need to scroll in one direction. Right? I don't need to go vertically and then horizontally to get to the next page. Everything is vertically. So I actually like leaving things in this arrangement pretty often. If I want to see things laid out horizontally, instead of using that option, I will use the drop down here to go to Continuous View. Continuous View is one big long page with no breaks, just one long page. So continuous view in some ways is better than just having your pages laid out horizontally. Better, I don't know. It's often a useful thing. So continuous view is a good way of seeing your score. Now all you have to do is scroll horizontally, and you don't have to score vertically unless, maybe you're zoomed in too far to see the whole score at once. And now you can zoom vertically to see the rest of the instruments, and horizontally, this is shift to finger swipe to see, more measures. So continuous view is actually a useful thing there. And I see a comment about moving from one computer to another by email. Oh, you mean to actually move a score from one to another? Yeah, I use Google Drive for that. I just save all my scores to Google Drive, and then all my computers know how to find Google Drive, and I can just load it there. So that's what I'm generally doing when I want to move a score from one computer to another. If it's not my computer, I don't want to give someone access to my Google Drive necessarily, so I will email the score. All right, so yeah, continuous view is definitely a thing. While we're at it, I want to show this other one, single page, because this one seems to confuse people. Frankly, I'm not positive I understand the rationale for its existence. What it does is it presents your score as one long vertical page, which is really kind of awkward here because it's hard for me to tell where one system ends and the next one starts. So realistically, it's not a good choice for this score. It's a better choice for a different one. So let me, here's a part, an alto saxophone part to a score. And yeah, maybe that page break is a little visually disorienting. So maybe I would like to switch to single page view for that. And now it just sort of scrolls with no break. Maybe you find that useful. Personally, I like how pages chunk things up into manageable sections for me. So I don't tend to work in single page mode or continuous view all that much. I actually kind of like how pages help me organize what I'm seeing. But, there's the right tool for the right job, is all I would say about that. So, yeah, I basically never use single page view. Well, yeah, very rarely. So my page view here is now set again to vertical scrolling, but I'm going to go back to the default. I'm going to go back to Edit, Preferences, change it back to horizontal, and leave it that way for a while. Let's see. A remote keyboard with page up and no laptop. So yeah, so in that case, you will use FN plus, up, down, left, right. Now, if there's no swipe capability, most mice have a physical wheel. That's the scroll. But older mice don't. So get a new mouse, first of all. If you have an older mouse that doesn't have a scroll wheel, by older, I mean like the 1980s mice didn't typically have scroll wheels. Pretty much all mice since then, since like the 90s, pretty much all have scroll wheels that I've ever seen anyhow. I guess maybe not Mac, I don't know. But also there are laptops, ThinkPads, that have that little eraser, right? That little thing that looks like a pencil eraser, that's your pointing device. That is the only device I know of that does not provide any easy way to scroll. So for that, you need page up, page down for sure, or FN up, down. So yeah, that is something to be aware of. But most devices with touch devices, two-finger swipe virtually always does it. There's also like track balls, right, where it's like a rolly ball thing. And on those, usually there's either also a scroll wheel or like holding control or shift while doing this will do a scroll. Every device is a little different, but pretty much most of them will provide some sort of gesture for that. All right. So I've showed you a bunch of things already, but I'm not done. I'm not done by any stretch because there's quite a lot of other things that we might want. So I'm going to switch to this big band arrangement that I did some years ago, and let's look at the score for it. And if I look at the score, you can see it starts off just the rhythm section: guitar, piano, bass, drums. And at some point, instruments come in, right? Now we have the saxophones come in, and then the brass. And at that point, the rhythm section is out. There's no rhythm section for a while. And then the rhythm section comes in here at letter C, and there's a key change. There's a key change there, right? These are all things that I can see when I'm zooming out. All right, so now what if I want to just go to that spot where that first key change was? How do I find that quickly? Well, there is a tool specifically to give you a really nice visual representation of your score. I will say it takes getting used to. I only use this with really large scores. By large, I mean long, with many key changes, time signature changes, and instrument changes. So also, many instruments. That's the only time I typically use this tool. But in that situation, it's actually quite valuable, and it's called the timeline. So under the View menu, if I pick Timeline, so now you can see in a visual way here, here's the tempo marked freely, tempo, retard, tempo. Here's slower, retard. So you can see all the tempo markings, but I can also see where the key changes are. So here at the beginning, it's 1 sharp. This is where it changed to 1 flat. So I can click there, and that takes me right to that first key change. Also, this window is resizable. It's also giving me an overview of all my instruments. And in doing so, for some reason, it doesn't quite want to give me all of them. I can't resize this big enough to be all the way to show all of them to me. And to be honest, I don't know. Presentation. Remember, I said at the beginning of the score, it was only the rhythm section. That's this kind of shaded gray area. And then this lighter area is saying that these instruments are not playing. This area here is showing that this is what's actually visible. The fact that this has actually got a blue rectangle around it and is white, that's what's actually visible on the screen right now. Some empty measures followed by the saxophones. So empty measures white and then dark. So sort of light is empty measures that you can't see right now. Sort of dark are measures with notes in it that you can't see right now. Really bright measures are empty measures you can see right now. Really dark blocks here are the measures that have notes in them that you can see. So this lets me see where those instruments came in. It also lets me find where the rhythm section comes back. Like you can see the rhythm section drops out here. Well, the rhythm section basically comes back around here. It looks like one instrument, the bass, comes back here, but the rest of the instruments come back here. So I can jump here to get to that spot where the rhythm section came back in. So it's a really nice view of these things. And you can also go by rehearsal letter. I can say, oh, letter E. I'll just go to letter E. You can also go by where the double bars are, right? Here's a double bar. Or where there's repeats. If there were any repeats in here, they would also be showing up in this display. So it's really nice for giving you that overview, but it is kind of a confusing mess of information. So your score has to be complicated enough that this simplifies it. For a lot of scores, this just ends up looking confusing and doesn't really help. There's a minimum size for the inspector that's keeping it small, but actually it's not the inspector that's the problem. I think it's the status bar. I think if I turn off the status bar, I think there's some sort of issue where the status bar is maybe because the size of this, nope, it's still off by 1. I can't get the drums in. Everything but the drums is showing up. It might have to do with invisible instruments. I'm just not really sure, but I'm pretty sure. Let me close that play panel. It could be the play panel that's the problem. I think it was the play panel. So not the inspector, but the play panel seemed to be in the way. All right, I just learned something. So one of the things you can do is if you're like, you know what, I don't really want to see all these instruments, you can actually, that actually just gets you there. But if I know that there's no repeats in this thing, which there aren't, I can just right click where it says in this here and say, you know what, I don't want to see the jumps and markers because there aren't any repeats. And now that line goes away. So that's a way you can kind of streamline the display here a little bit. What does this button do? Is that the one that makes the tenor sax? Yeah. Oh, hides it in the score. Oh, cool. I didn't know you could do that. Huh, check that out. You can hide instruments in the score directly from the timeline. If I knew that, I forgot. See, no matter how much you know about MuseScore, there's always something new to learn. So there's one right there. All right, so I see Michael Fretless Spaceman is saying you wish there was a thing for text. So yeah, now the thing is there is going to be probably a lot of text that would be pretty cluttered pretty quick. But yeah, you're right. If you do have a specific instruction in there, it would be kind of nice to show. The only text that does show up are the tempo. So that's that. Now, if you use rehearsal marks for that purpose, then it will show up there. So anyhow, there's that. On a related note, there's also an older tool. So the timeline is, I don't know, 3 years old, something like that. For longer than that, there's been a tool called the Navigator. The Navigator is, I think, what a lot of people use who don't figure out the scroll wheel, because it's not a bad, I mean, I can't get any useful information out of those pages, but I can certainly move around, right? I can certainly scroll through my pages that way. And if I know I'm trying to get to page 8, I can get to page 8. I don't know what's there, but if I knew what I wanted was on page 8, it'll get me there, right? And you can resize this also to be a little more useful, right? I can see that this section here has saxophones and pretty much nothing else. So that's a somewhat useful view sometimes. So yeah, the Navigator can be useful. And, depending on your screen real estate, how much space you want to devote to it. I know some people like to leave the Navigator up all the time. For me, there's pretty much nothing I could do with a Navigator that I can't do more quickly with page up, page down, or home and end. But yeah, if you find a use for it, by all means, use the Navigator as another way of moving around. But let's say I did want to go to page 8. Instead of having to find page 8 on the Navigator, I want to use the find command. So if I type, let me zoom in a little more here, because I don't want to, here, I'll zoom in about that much, and then Control Home, go back to the beginning. If I type Control F, it gives me a find box down at the bottom of the screen. And in that find box, I can either type a measure number. Like if I type 17, it takes me to measure 17. If I type, let me hit backspace. If I type 74, it takes me to measure 74. If I want to go to measure 3, I can type 3. What if I want to go to page 3? Well, I type P3, and that'll take me to page 3. Am I on page 3? I want to say I am. Yes, I am. Okay, good. What if I want to go to a rehearsal letter? Well, I can just type that letter. If I want to go to rehearsal letter R, I just type an R in here. And that takes me to letter R, except I don't think there is an R in this score. So how about if I go to letter F? That takes me to letter F. So the find command is a nice way to move around by if you know a measure number, or if you know a page number, or if you know a rehearsal letter. So that's another useful navigation tool. So about the timeline, can it be zoomed? That's actually a good question. I kind of don't think so. But if it's possible, it's going to be something like control. Oh, this stretches. Check that out. I'm control swiping because that's zoom, and what it's doing is it's compressing the display horizontally, which is kind of cool. It's not doing anything about the vertical spacing. Does shift swipe maybe do that? Nope. But anyhow, the fact that control swipe zooms it so that you could see the entire score if you want. If you zoom out far enough, you can see the entire score all at once. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how it chooses, how big to make it to begin with. But anyhow, that's what appears to be possible. All right. So when I used find to get to measure 17, it appeared on the right of the screen. So, all right. So I didn't actually pay attention to where measure 17 was, but I will tell you that no, there's not necessarily. Let me go to measure 17 again. 17. So 17 is somewhere on the page here. Where is it? I don't know. I'm zoomed out too far, but I will tell you it's selected the first element in measure 17. So you're saying it was on the right, and I say I don't think that's true. I think it's here. It's right there, measure 17. So maybe it might have been, depending on where I was before. Yeah, I don't know how it decides how to position things, but it is going to position that measure to be in view. Even if I'm zoomed way in, let's go to the end. Now, Control F, 17. It zooms, I'm zoomed in, but it focused me, took me right there, and highlighted that measure. I will tell you right now that when I'm zoomed out, I can't see that that measure is highlighted. So what do? I press N. When I press N, it puts me, I can't see it because apparently I lost my selection. Let me do that again. When I typed N, I typed it into the search box, right? So I didn't mean that. Let's leave. I press escape to get out of find. So right now measure 17 is selected, but if I'm having trouble seeing measure 17, I'll press N. And that puts me in node input mode. And now I can see my cursor. Now I can see where measure 17 is. So that's my little trick. After doing a find to get me somewhere, and I'm like, where the heck is that cursor? I'll press N to go to node input mode. Then I can see the cursor. That's the best trick I have for you there. So now, do page numbers change if staves are suppressed? Page numbers are going to be consecutive. So yeah, if you hide enough empty staves that you're able to fit more system, like right now, this big band score here, I'm never going to get any. This big band score has one system per page. However, if I hide empty staves in format, style, hide empty staves, there's a lot of empty staves here. So I think this is going to allow multiple systems to fit per page. The first system is still showing me everything. But here we can see I was able to fit two systems because this is now a spot where the brass basically drop out. So we're able to fit two systems on this page. So overall, it's going to have fewer pages as a result of that. And the page numbers are consecutive. So yes, the page numbers will reflect it. If I type Control F and then say P9, it's going to go to what the actual page 9 is right now, not the measure that would have been page 9 if I weren't hiding empty staves. It will go to the actual page 9. All right, I feel like I want to undo some changes here because who knows what the heck I've done to this score at this point. All right, so there you go. Navigator vertical. Oh yeah, so the deal is the navigator is going to show up where it needs to show up based on what view you're in. In other words, when I'm in page view here with my pages horizontal like that, then the navigator is also going to be horizontal because it would kind of steal room from the score to put it on the side. However, if you change your view back to the other thing that I had switched it to temporarily, remember I went to Edit, Preferences, Canvas, changed it to vertical. When I do that, hello, now the navigator is also vertical. So the navigator's orientation reflects your canvas orientation. I suppose there could be certain special cases where that's not what you want, and as far as I know, we don't support it. But anyhow, that's what's going on there. It's designed so that it's taking up the least amount of useful space. And if you're scrolling vertically like this, then chances are you don't want to give up any of that vertical space because that's where you're scrolling, and it's going to make you have to scroll more. So that's why it was, again, consensus of this was a requested feature actually, where it used to always be on the side, but then people said, hey, once we're scrolling vertically, I think I want my navigator to be vertical too. And the developer said, yeah, that does sound like a good idea. So someone implemented it. It wasn't me. So that is what that is. Now, at this point, I've showed you pretty much most of the things that I use on any regular basis to move around. But there is more. And so I am going to show you a couple other things because you might find them useful. You never know. Um, so in the view menu, I think I turn off the navigator there. There's nothing else in particular here that's about navigation per se, except there is this view to let you view two documents side by side or stacked. So again, it's going to be a vertical versus horizontal arrangement. So why would this be useful? Well, check this out. What if I want to look at, say, the alto sax? I want to look at the alto sax 2 part while simultaneously over here look at my soprano sax part. Well, that lets me do that. So that's kind of nice. Lets me compare them. And by the way, the inspector is taking up space here. I can just close that or use the shortcut F8. And when I do that, now I have more space and I can drag this divider line here so that these scores, I guess this score here I have set to page width. This view here is apparently not responding to that, which yeah, it is. It's just responding to it oddly. So I don't know. In any case, it lets you have this side-by-side view so you can compare two parts. To be honest, I don't know that I've ever thought to do this, but it's brilliant. I should totally do this because this would allow me to do things like see if I'm putting line breaks in compatible places. I don't necessarily want them all in the same place because, you know, that they might differ. You know, there's places where you know, the soprano sax has more notes because it's playing in places when the alto isn't. So you know, there might be different places for line breaks, but there might be other places where they're similar. And so here I can kind of compare. I can compare what adjustments I made to one. Like here's an example right off the bat here. Soprano sax is resting for 3 bars at the end of letter B, but I guess that's true here also. I just laid it out differently for who knows what reason. Maybe not a good reason. Maybe this is showing me that I did something inconsistently for no good reason and that I would have been better off choosing something consistent. Well, I really like how it looks for the soprano sax, so I think I'm going to delete that line break and add the one the same place I have it here, which is before the 3 measure rest. Boom, there you go. Is that more consistent? Yeah, it is. So I like that. This one, I guess, has all those eighth notes in it. That makes it a little bit different, but not different enough for me to care. There's also plugins that will make them completely consistent if you want, but I almost never am going to want that. So anyhow, this side-by-side view is occasionally useful, and the stacked is just the same thing, but you know, arranged vertically. So that's a kind of a nice view sometimes to have. Also, do be aware of that zoom setting. I'm set to page width right now, which means the width of the score is the width of the available space here. If I use F9 to get rid of the palettes, I got a really wide score now. Bring the palettes in, it gets a little narrower. Bring the inspector in, gets a little narrower still. I like this view a lot on this computer because the monitor is just big enough that I can get away with this. This to me is readable. It's a little small. This view is smaller than that same page would be printed, but it's basically good enough. Control 0 zooms to real life size. This is now physically the same size as a piece of paper. So if I ever need to see it life size to see it a little better, Control 0 does that. Control / will return you to page width, and it kind of toggles between page width and whatever else. I cannot remember if that was a default shortcut or if I set that up myself. Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts, search for page, zoom. Oh, I see. It's page dash width. So this right here, zoom to page width. This is where you would need to custom define a shortcut if you don't have it already defined. And if you're using an older version of MuseScore, you definitely won't have it already defined. But you'd be able to define that yourself. So Yeah, I will sometimes zoom in with Control 0, but then I'll, just sort of go back and forth between I can see everything and I can see at a full size. On another monitor, another computer I use, the monitor isn't quite as big, and I basically can't read it here. I end up with too little space available on my window to if I have the inspector and palettes open, as I generally do while I'm editing. So I don't use page width on that other computer. So yeah, definitely you want it. That when I was showing the side by side view, I got hung up looking at the page breaks. But realistically, it's making sure that you've added the same articulations to both, and that you've generally speaking done things in a consistent way, whether it's the layout or actual content. Did I add slurs in the same places? Did I? Yeah, that's a big one right there. Comparing slurs. I usually do that in the score. But yeah, doing it in part could be a useful thing, and comparing those. So all right. So can you copy from document to document? So yeah, if there's a plugin that can copy from score to a part, then clearly the capability exists in the plugin framework. All we need is some person to decide that's a useful enough plugin to write to copy from one score to another or from one part to another. In principle, it's totally doable, and the existing plugin that copies score breaks into the parts would make a fine starting point, and then you just change a few lines of code somewhere, and now it can copy other things also. So that would probably be a nice fun project for someone who wanted to kind of dip their hands into plugin programming. There's a plugin that already does most of it. Tweak it some, it would do the rest. So when I was in that preferences shortcuts window, I want to show a couple other shortcuts that exist because they're actually kind of interesting. I'm going to type go. What we'll see here is that there's actually a lot of shortcuts that move around in different ways. Go to bottom note in chord. Go to first empty trailing measure. That sounds like a really strange thing to say, but I'll tell you what it's useful for. I'm going to define a shortcut for it. I'm going to hit define, and I'm going to type, I don't know, I'll make it be control tick. I'm using tick a lot for shortcuts that I think are expendable. Control tick. Add. All right, so what does that do? Well, let's say that I have a new score here, and I'm starting to fill it with notes. I don't know why I typed a bunch of things that aren't notes. All right. So actually, you can get a sense of how much slower my computer is while I'm broadcasting by how long it's taking it to catch up with that. So I entered a bunch of notes, and now I'm going to press R to just repeat that measure because I want to fill my score with a lot of notes. And then I sort of ran out of time, and I've got some empty measures left. So and then I leave for the day. Well, and then I close the score. And now I want to come back and find where did I leave off? How am I going to find where I left off? If I just open the score, where did I leave off? I don't know. It could be pages on. How about if I just go control tick? That jumps right to that first empty trailing measure. That's where I left off. So it's a nice, a quick way to just jump to that specific spot where you left off working last time, assuming you work left to right. So that's kind of an interesting, cute little command that was added maybe a year or so ago. Yeah. There's other commands in here. Go to next system. I think this one was not defined by default. I think I defined my own shortcut for that, but that moves system by system, which can be useful, I guess. If I'm on this measure, well, let me undo all of that junk. Yeah, there we go. Good enough. If I'm here in measure 5 and now I'm like, I really want to get down to the next system below that. Well, according to what I just had defined, control bracket moves me to the next system. Did it? Yes, it did. It's like I'm having to like zoom in to see the highlighting, but control bracket brought me down here. Control other bracket brought me up there to 5. 9, 5, right? It's moving me system by system. Is that a useful thing? Not to me at this very moment. Is there a time in someone's life where it could be useful? Yes, or that command wouldn't have been implemented, right? So there's a number of commands here, go to this, go to that, that, they exist because someone found them useful. Go to next section. Here's a really cool one, actually, that I think is probably going to be more useful to me. I'm going to see if that was the default. Go to next system. All right, now I'm going to clear it because I actually don't see myself ever using that one. So I'm going to reset those. But what I will do is go to next section, and I'll show you how I want to use that one. I'm going to define control right bracket. That goes to the next section, and then previous section will be control left bracket. All right, what is a section, you might be wondering? Well, it's something defined by a section break. I have section breaks I use quite a lot in my educational handouts. So let me open one of my handouts. How about this guy here? This is from my counterpoint course that I'm working on. If I'm here in the first example here, there's a section break at the end of that example. So if I hit control bracket, it's going to take me to the next section, which is this next block of text. Then control bracket from there takes me to the next section, which is right here, the first measure of the next section. So it allows me to navigate from section to section. Now, you might not think of that as being especially useful, but as a blind user navigating a handout, it allows you to see text, then get to the example, then the text, then the example. It's really potentially useful for that sort of thing. So can you put in notes without bar lines and decide on time later? No, you can't. I did not do that. I just entered short notes. There has been a long-standing request to be able to enter notes without bar lines and then add bar lines later. It requires a fairly fundamental change to how things would have to work under the hood to be able to do that. And realistically, no one has found it valuable enough to spend their time implementing it. So all it would take is someone who has the development skills to find it useful, to design how that would work, and then implement it. But so far, that has never happened. So in that preferences dialog, again, all sorts of other commands. Ones that you might want to know about are just navigating note by note in note input mode. So let me come to my empty. Now I'm going to create a new score. I will make it a grand staff. And I got my empty score here. I'm going to start entering some notes. Zoom in a little bit. I enter some notes. And now I want to go down to the bottom staff. How would you do that? Well, if you try to click in the bottom staff to go there, it's going to enter the note. I didn't want to enter note. I just wanted to move the cursor there. Well, there's a shortcut for that. On most computers, that shortcut would be, I believe, Shift. See, I can't remember, and I can't remember to say it, but I think it's Shift, Alt, down arrow. On my computer, though, that's a reserved keyboard, a reserved command for something else. So I use Shift, Alt. Nope, not Shift, Alt, Control. Dang it. See, I can never remember while I'm trying to explain things like that. It's just bracket for me. I made it be just bracket. But it's some command. In fact, if I go back to Edit, Preferences, next higher pitch note in chord, Alt up. That's what it is. Alt up, Alt down. And then there's Control Alt up and down also. Control Alt up. That's one I didn't try. So if I had had another note in this chord, let me add a G to it. Control Alt up and down, or in my case, bracket, moves between the notes in the chord. And when it runs out of notes, you see it's on the G. Then I Control Alt down moves me to the E. Control Alt down again moves me to the next staff. When it runs out of notes in the chord, it moves to the next voice. When it runs out of notes, when it runs out of voices, it moves to the next staff. So you can totally do everything you need to do to move from staff to staff or from voice to voice without ever leaving note input mode, without ever clicking. You can do everything just by using those keyboard shortcuts, and that saves a ton of time in note input. So if you want staves without bar lines, now that's easy to do. All I have to do is select these two staves and say Tools, Measures, Join Selected Measures. And now I have no bar lines, right? And then I can, put in a line break there, and now I have a whole staff there with no bar lines. So you can do things like that if your goal is to create non-metric music. But I think that's not what we're talking about here. I don't think Joanne's asking about creating non-metric music. I think she's talking about entering music that she doesn't know the rhythm for by saying, well, I get the pitches first, then I'll figure out the rhythm. And that every time you change the duration of a note, that means every single note after that has to get moved later. It's doable, but again, no one has actually implemented anything like that. So that capability just doesn't exist. The ability to enter pitches with no rhythm, then decide on rhythm. That just isn't a thing in MuseScore. But if the goal is just to have non-metric music, music in which you don't see bar lines, then yes, just join the measures. You can select the time signature, press V to make it invisible, and you can create all the Renaissance looking music you want that way. Alt down is a little different than Control Alt up down, and there's just different shortcuts because Alt down, and again, oh yeah, see that's a problem on my computer. Alt down does that weird thing, which is why I had to customize some of mine. But in any case, in that dialog, there's just all those different commands to move you around within measures, up and down, move you sideways, move you between staves. As far as moving sideways goes, if you haven't seen this before, if I hit the right arrow, it moves me right. There's that chord, rest, right, rest. It's moving me chord by chord. It's moving me from one, and it's skipping everything that's not a chord or a rest, basically. It's skipping that bar line, right? It's skipping any text that was added. It's just moving you between the notes. It's meant as an aid to note input. However, Alt left and Alt right are much more complete. So Alt left right now moves to that A flat, then the D, then the B flat, then the A flat, then the D, then the B flat, then the rest, and then the bar line, and then that. And if there had been text in here, like here, let me go back from this B flat, takes me to the dynamic marking, MF, then to that word mute up there, then to the chord symbol, then to the rest, then to the double bar. This was implemented specifically as an aid for blind musicians because their screen reader will read each one of those elements. So they can read a full score using Alt left and Alt right to navigate rather than only hearing notes and chords and rests. Basically, they can actually hear every single note, every single rest, every single text element, every bar line, everything that's in the score. They can hear read by their screen reader. But even I use Alt left and Alt right a lot just as a way to efficiently select things without having to laboriously move my mouse over it and click it. It's very often a lot faster to navigate to it with the keyboard since I'm doing everything else with the keyboard, and it lets me be quite precise about it. So, for me personally, I use Alt left and Alt right to select fairly often. Anyhow, the other thing to know, other than right and left, that moves a note at a time, Alt left and Alt right, that move kind of an element at a time, is Control. Sorry, I meant to be pressing Alt there to be moving a note at a time, but also Control right moves a measure at a time. You could think of that as being, so here I am in this measure, here I am there. You zoom in a little more. There's that, there's that, there's that, right? There's that. So Control left and Control right move at a measure at a time. Left and right by themselves move a note at a time. So you can think of that as being like a word processor where left and right go a letter at a time, Control left and right go a word at a time. So it's designed to be intuitive if you think like a word processor. Rests to Yeah, so everyone's keyboards are different, and if Control Alt down doesn't work for you, you might have to customize that shortcut like I did. Um, so I customized that to be whatever it was, Control Alt bracket, because the bracket keys aren't used in any of the predefined shortcuts, so I define that. So by the way, to enter rests, if you weren't aware of it, when you're in node input mode, C enters a C, D enters a D, 0 enters a rest. Or if you prefer clicking on the staff with the left mouse button enters a note, with the right mouse button enters a rest. So, but again, if you're trying to get from just playing something to immediately seeing notes, you're skipping the intermediate step. Until you know what that rhythm is, you're not ready for MuseScore. You're not ready. I'm not saying you're not ready to use the program at all. You're not ready to enter that score in MuseScore. Until you know what the rhythm is, by having worked it out in your head or with pencil and paper, don't try to enter it. You're just going to drive yourself crazy. So don't drive yourself crazy. Work out the rhythms, then enter it. It's going to go lightning quick once you discipline yourself to work out the rhythm first. So that could mean do it on pencil and paper, could mean just figure it out in your head, but one way or the other, rhythm first, unless you want to spend 100 times longer than is necessary. Okay, so have I showed you every last thing that is possible to do with navigation? No, probably not. But I feel like I've showed you most of the things that are at all potentially useful. And again, when you're hanging out there in Edit Preferences, remember I use that search box at the bottom of the dialog to say go, because most of these navigation commands start with go to. Do they all? Well, I think not. I think some of them just say next. So here we go, next staff or voice. That's where that bracket was. So the alt bracket, or alt up down, moves to the next note in the chord, then the next voice, then the next staff. But there's a command that just says next staff or voice, and that command skips the notes of the chord. It just moves between voices and staves. So I tend to use that command a lot in my note input. So is there anything else in there? Well, while you're entering, most of these are about entering things, right? The next beat while typing chord symbols to move to the next beat, semicolon. That's not navigation, that's entry of chord symbols. So, yeah, I think that's about the only command. Screen next, page up, down. Okay, fine, but we've already seen that. So yeah, I think there aren't any more navigation commands that are hiding that aren't, other than that one, next staff or voice. Other than that one, I don't think there's any commands that any navigation commands that don't start with the word go. So I mentioned something about pointing with double click and pitch changes. Yeah, I can show you. You're not going to see my double click, but well, actually, I think what you're actually talking about is if I just click that note and drag up and down, it changed pitch, right? That's an E now. That's a D. That's because on my touchpad, I clicked, and then with my finger still down, I dragged. Click, drag, and it changed the pitch. If, however, I double click, now I'm in edit mode. Let me get my status bar back because I disappeared that a while ago. If I accidentally, instead of starting with a click, I started with a double click, now I try dragging, look what's happening. It's letting me just have a floating note, which is something you might want sometimes. It can be useful creating educational worksheets, any number of situations you might want just a floating note. So if you've double clicked the note to get it into edit mode and you start dragging it around now, you're just dragging it. I could drag this all the way down here, and when I leave edit mode and click it, it's still that high E. So if you accidentally double click and drag, that's what's going to happen. People do that a lot. Once a month or so, someone posts to the forum, I have a note in my score, it's a G, but it's playing like a B or something. And it turns out it's because they double clicked and dragged it, thinking they were changing it. They had entered it as a B, and then they dragged it down to a G, thinking they were changing it to a G, but they accidentally double clicked. And as a result, it didn't transpose. It did what drag usually does, right? For most things, double click just drags it. It just changes the physical position. So it's important that notes have that ability also. But for most things, it's a double click that starts that. So it's that way for notes, and therefore a lot of people accidentally find themselves doing that. So I am just giving you that fair warning. One of these days, that person will be you. You will accidentally initiate a drag with a double click, and you'll end up with a note that's in the wrong place for what it is. Or maybe it'll never happen to you, but it's happened to hundreds of others before. So anyhow, that's what that is about. All right. So I feel like I've showed you a whole lot of stuff about navigation. Where am I in my score right now? I don't know. I'm somewhere in the middle. How about if I zoom out? So control, whoops, what did I do? Oh, my focus was on the tabs here. So I started accidentally scrolling through the tabs. I didn't mean that. Let me click my actual score, MuseScore Café, click a blank spot in it. Now I'm going to control two-finger swipe to get a reasonable size on the thing. And now I'll press Control Home to move the view to the home while also selecting the beginning. If I had only selected home, it would have moved the view, but it would have left something else selected. I don't want something else selected. I want the first thing in the score selected, because the next thing I'm going to do is start playing this guy after I turn the volume down. So I'll open my play panel, turn my volume down, and now start playing. So this has been the MuseScore Cafe. My name is Marc Sabatella, and this is brought to you by Mastering MuseScore. So we do this every Wednesday. I pick some topic and show you whatever I can think of about that topic. You all ask questions about it. I answer those. And that is what happens during these MuseScore Cafes every Wednesday. On the first Wednesday of the month, we do an Ask Me Anything session. Next week, by my math, is the first Wednesday of the month. Am I correct about that? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I think it is true, though, because I think I worked that out earlier. Actually, I should check just to be sure. Check my calendar. Next Wednesday is, in fact, the first of the month. So what that means is it's going to be an Ask Me Anything session. During the session, ask me questions. I'm going to prioritize questions that come in via the chat. If we run out of questions in the chat, I'll also be looking at questions that maybe got submitted to the community site. So be sure to visit the community site, go to the conversation space, and you can ask questions there, and if I have time, I will get to them. But maybe someone can answer them before we even get to the session. The other thing to use about the community site is if your question requires me to load your score, post your score there. Then when we get to the cafe, I will be able to get to it, because you can't post your score to the chat. So by posting it to the conversation space, everyone can see it. We might be able to get your question answered without taking up time from the actual cafe session. But if it's something that does fit well in the cafe session, I'll have access to the score there. So will everyone else, and I will be able to access it there. So next week, be thinking about if you have any questions you want answered, maybe write them down. Feel free to post them to the conversation. But again, asking them in the chat is where my main focus will be. So I hope everyone had a good time today, and I will see you next time.